Welcome. I'm Brad Miller, and I'm here with Jason Medford. And today we're going to do part two. Um, if you were at our discussion last time, I had a quote, and we talked a little bit about the idea of um, indoctrination and having other people's beliefs and kind of carrying those out. And that was based on my initial interpretation or kind of what came to my mind immediately when I read this quote. But we thought that on this episode would be fun to go and to dive into the mind of Jason and what came to his mind when I first read this quote. So to remind you of what the quote was, so the quote is, "True growth is not growing inside of someone else's systems of values and beliefs, but finding and discovering your own."
Yep.
And again, when I heard that, my first thought was the idea of you kind of get indoctrinated. And then as you kind of grow, you kind of start discovering what that means for you. And if you believe or kind of go along with what you've been taught, whatever. But I know Jason had a different kind of take on that. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that today. So, Jason, what
Yeah.
did
So,
this bring to your mind?
so I think it's interesting, and I think that this is actually a great way to do it. So again, if you didn't hear the last episode, then go back and listen to the one that's probably titled
Right.
something
We'll still
like
be here.
is that really what you believe, right? But it's probably the one just before this one. Go back and listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's great to discuss like this too, because one thing is never just one thing. Anything is never just one thing. And I can't remember if I brought it up before, right? But that quote can mean different things to different people. If we read that quote a year from now, it's probably going to mean something different to Brad and something different to me based on the context or circumstances that we're living in. And so I think it's a great learning and teaching, right? To say, okay, well, we took this quote and the first episode we kind of talked about what first jumped into Brad's mind. Now on this one, let's kind of go down the rabbit hole of where Jason's mind kind of first went, right? And there's no right, there's no wrong, but they're just kind of some different perspectives and different things that we've learned or kind of thought about as well. And so one of the places where my mind went is still somewhat down the road of indoctrination and in kind of giving over your personal power to other people, but it comes in a slightly different way, right? So kind of in the first episode, we talked a lot about kind of the indoctrination that we get from our parents and the society that we grow up in. But that continues into our adult life as well, to where a lot of times we will see somebody, you can call them an influencer, a celebrity, somebody that you just admire or respect, right? But that a lot of times, even as adults, right, we will look at or see this other person and we will want to emulate them. We want to be like them, be like Mike, right? Be like whoever.
Be like Mike.
I want to be like Mike. Here we go, right? And what ends up happening is I think a lot of times people go into that somewhat blindly, right? Because again, obviously, if we respect somebody, we want to kind of be like them, but it goes back to that same thing. But is that really you, right? And so, again, I can't remember what we shared beforehand or not, but anyway, Brad and I are different. We're the same, but we're different, right? A palm tree is different than an oak tree. They're both trees, but they're different, right? And so, does it make any sense for a palm tree to wish to be an oak tree? Does it make any sense for an oak tree to wish to be a palm tree? No. Can the bush in the ground say, God damn it, I don't want to be planted right here. I'd rather be over there 500 yards. Does that make any sense? No, right?
Mind if it's sunny over there. And
Maybe it's sunnier, right? But the bush can't do anything about it, right? The bush is the bush. Well, no, another episode on that one, right? But we should be comfortable with who we are and not try to be someone else. Okay, and so that's just kind of the context, because what I've seen, and this is kind of across the whole personal development space in general, but I see a lot of people who respect and want to be like other people, but it almost becomes a hero worship, to where they're effectively kind of worshiping the other person as a hero, instead of, we're all the same, right? We're all the same. We've talked about that before. But, where I've seen things like, again, somebody respects somebody and, oh, this person's a hypnotist. Oh, this person is a coach. Oh, this person is a whatever, right? So now I'm going to kind of throw away everything that I'd been doing, and now I have to go and do this, because in order for me to be like them, I have to start doing everything like them, right? And so, instead of that, where we were kind of talking about, well, is that really what you believe, right? But again, is it's like, is that really you? Is that really authentically who you are, right? Because again, there's lots of different ways to make money in this world. How you make your money doesn't necessarily matter, right, for your spiritual path, right? Unless you're manipulating, taking advantage of people, doing things that are kind of icky that way, right? Then obviously that can hurt you spiritually as well. But it doesn't matter whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a hypnotist, whether you're a coach, whether you're a professional athlete, whether you're a, burger flipper at McDonald's. It doesn't really matter, right? And so, like I said, that's kind of where my mind first went. So I'll kind of shut up now. So Brad kind of chime in on it here, right? As far as, because like I said, that's kind of a totally different view. But I saw it as, I think the first part of the quote was something like living within the constraints, or what was the word that was used?
Growing inside of someone else's systems of values.
Someone else's systems, right, too. So to me, I kind of picked up more on that systems word, that it's not just the values or beliefs, but that a lot of people will tell you this is how you have to do it. Or, if you're a business owner, well, this is how you have to market this. In order to succeed, you have to do it this way, right? And so for me, for a long time, I was taught over and over again, put people in fear. People don't make decisions unless they're put into fear, right? And the whole time I felt icky about it, because my whole purpose is to help people get out of fear. So it's like, why the hell would I do my marketing in such a way to make somebody go into fear just to get them to buy something from me, when my whole purpose is to help people get out of fear, right? But for a long time,
for your product.
Yeah, creating artificial demand for a product, right? But for a long time, I chose to get stuck in those systems and believing what other people were telling me, instead of doing what's right for Jason, right? I would rather do love marketing than fear marketing. Now, what that looks like, I don't know, but I'm just trying to show up and spread love. And, again, if people want it, people get it. Instead of telling people that, your life's going to go to hell if you don't buy my product, because that's not the kind of person that I am. So anyway, that was the context as to where my brain was going. So now where are we going, Brad, in the discussion?
No, I mean, I think it, it I took it a one direction, and I think this kind of takes it. My started basically how you were kind of raised and grown, and kind of the systems you kind of, because as kids, there's the quote, something along the lines of, give me a kid up to the age of 7 or something, and I
We'll show
will
you the
basically
man.
kind of mold them. And exactly. And so the idea that as kids we are take everything around us, the our parents, neighbors, just society, media, everything else, and everything goes into creating the person that we kind of ultimately end up as. And that continues as we grow up, through school, and as we get into our professions and things. We're still kind of, these other people are kind of say, this is what this needs to happen, and we kind of grow up. And the idea of, we discover that, hey, maybe that's not actually what it is. That's not maybe the way that I think that it should be. And I think you're looking at it kind of the idea that now, as we are kind of making some of these decisions on our own, kind of thinking for ourselves, there are a lot of people out there who are maybe holding themselves out in a particular manner, that they're coming across as a spiritual advisor, some sort of a guru, and spiritual or non or whatnot, or someone that we're respecting, we look up to because of where we see them. And it could even be their professions. It could be maybe a lawyer that I see, that I think this is a great lawyer, they have a really successful practice, so if I want to, I want to be like them, so I'm going to kind of emulate what they do. I'm going to start acting the way they do, and set up my practice the way they are, and help the same kind of clients and all that kind of stuff. But that may not be true to me. Just because that works for them, that matches who they are, their personalities, their belief systems and things, that necessarily match me. You use the example of, kind of the instilling fear, and using fear to kind of drum up people's emotions, and then you have to get them to buy. Well, that doesn't work for you, because that doesn't match your values. It feels icky, you said, to you to do that. And I think there's some people who are kind of ignoring that, the icky feeling, or they're just shrugging it off and saying, well, if I want to be successful, I want to be like this person, I just have to deal with the icky. That's just part of the process of getting to being where this person is that icky's just there. Instead of sitting back and saying, why is it feeling icky to me? What is it about this that feels icky? What does that really mean? Does that mean that maybe this isn't matching up with something in my life? What's causing this, because a feeling of ickiness is a sign that there's some sort of dissonance in your life.
Yep.
What is that dissonance? What is not aligning, between what you're doing and who you are? And so I think really we can take this discussion in a couple different ways, but one way I think we could talk about is kind of the idea of, what is it that what are your values deep down? What are your core values, and how does the things that you do, your beliefs, kind of fit in with those values?
Well, and because I think, like you said, that dissonance that we feel, and the flip side of dissonance is alignment, right? And so we want to feel more aligned. And so, again, I mean, one of my deeper purposes is to get people out of fear, get people out of anxiety, get them into feeling gratitude and love and all these other things, right? And so it's not aligned for me to try to get them into those feelings just so I can sell them something, right? Because then in my feeling, or again, the way that I have my values set up, and again, this is no judgment on people who do it that way, because I've had a lot of people tell me at the same point, well, Jason, if you don't do that, you're not going to make any money. Well, okay, I guess I am going to choose, right, to put the emotional well-being of other people ahead of me making money. So if I don't make, $50 million a year selling these products, then I'm okay with that, because, I'm not about to make people feel that way just so I can get money. right? I don't value money that much to hurt or harm someone else for them to give me money, right? But again, that's just me.
Yeah.
And that's and
Sure.
that's how I view it, right? I mean, that's how I have to kind of um, feel that alignment with it.
Yeah. I think we got to be careful because, there are some people that might be part of their purpose. Then maybe they need to instill that fear in people because people aren't, um, that's the only way you can get their attention is by that
Mm-hmm.
fear. If you try to be nice and love, it's just not going to resonate with them. You have to that fear to be able to get them to motivate them, and then you can help them get beyond it and make the choices. So not to say that, necessarily
Right.
that your way is the best or that other
Nope.
people, everybody's got their place and their role and what fits with them. But for you, this is what works for you. And that's what's important here.
Yeah, and I think it's the difference too of everybody just choosing for themselves, because there's a big difference between copying and creating, right? And so what I see a lot of times are people just copying other people. And so they're not taking it or making it their own. A lot of times they're literally using exactly the same words that other people have done, and a lot of times when people reach out to me, some of the languaging that they'll use is like, oh, I know who trained you.
Where it
Right? Because
came from. Yeah.
I've seen that before. I know exactly where that came from, right? And a lot of times people are just blindly copying instead of creating. And there is a huge difference between copying and creating. So if we think about artists, right? And I know a lot of times when you're being trained, let's say to be a painter, sometimes in order to go through your training, you're supposed to kind of copy another piece of work, right? Or create a landscape as realistic as you can, sort of a thing, right? As part of kind of the learning process. But once you have learned some of the basics, you have to start creating art that is unique and aligned to yourself. And I think that's where a lot of times people don't end up making that switch over. They're just continuing to copy and staying within the values and beliefs and systems of these other people. And so they're not actually creating, right? And to me, that's where it's part of that true growth comes when you're creating. You're not growing when you're copying somebody else. You're growing when you're creating something new. Maybe you get inspired by somebody else, but then you take what you've learned there and you make it your own art. You do it in your own way, right? And again, it doesn't mean, as we're learning techniques, as we're doing certain things, I mean, it's like if I take the guitar right here, right? I have a particular way that I play and strum that is different than other people, right? And it's just because it's something that I've developed for myself. And again, there's probably other people that do it similar, but it's a way that resonates with me, and so that's the way I choose to play. Now, in some ways, it might limit me because there's if I want to recreate a song kind of word for word or copy the way an artist put it on the album, it's going to be hard for me to do that, because if they used a different strumming pattern or if they pick, for example, right? Because I'm not really a picker, except my nose maybe, but on the on the and that laughter break was brought to you by um,
Mucus. Oh.
by mucus, yeah, or what? Anyway, one of those things. But right, so because of that, when I play a song, it's going to sound different, right? Because my strumming pattern is different. My voice is different. It should sound different because I'm doing it, right?
Mhm.
That's what, cover bands just try to copy what the original artist did, right? But think about, instead, a lot of artists who, yes, have taken a song, but they made it their own, right? And to me, one of the great examples song that I love is called Woodstock, right? Which was actually written by Joni Mitchell. Now I love Joni Mitchell, fabulous artist, singer songwriter, wrote some amazing songs. In fact, she didn't go to Woodstock, but a lot of people who were at Woodstock said Joni captured the essence of Woodstock better than anybody else, and she didn't even go, right? So she wrote the song, but I don't really care for her version of it. But Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young took that song, right? And she was actually dating one of the guys from the group at the time. They took it, they spun it in their own way, did it in their own way, and actually Jimi Hendrix actually helped collaborate a little bit on it. And so now that I know that, there's a couple of the guitar riffs and things that they put in there that it's like, duh, that's Hendrix's influence right there, right? But they took that song that Joni had created and they didn't copy it, right? They played it. The words were slightly different, right? Because of the way that they set it up and the way that they, yes, musically, it was still kind of the same melody pattern, but it was totally different, right? At the same time. And so that's what I'm talking about, the copying versus creating. And I just see so many people that are copying instead of creating. And when you're copying, you're stuck in the system and values and beliefs of other people.
Yeah. So to help you professionals out here who are listening to us, I see this all the time in the legal profession when it comes to drafting contracts, because um, there's probably not a lawyer live that actually drafts all their documents from scratch. Everybody uses templates. We use old documents from other people, from things that we've done before, other attorneys in our firm, maybe us, documents from other deals we've been part of, and we take what we got, and ideally we use that and take bits and pieces of it and use it to build out our own version of whatever document, whatever contract it is. But there are still a lot of lawyers out there who basically take exactly what it is, and to some extent I feel a lot of this happen. You talk about the training component of painting. It's very similar with the law. When younger associates basically are told, here's a template, use this, and they're not really encouraged to create beyond it. Basically they're saying, here's a document, and the lawyer kind of wants them to use the four corners of what's there, stay in this lane, and basically just change the names and dates and things like that in there, and and it's kind of good to go. And that, besides not helping the lawyer who's drafting it, I think it also does a disservice to the people who are the clients and are actually using the contract, because it's not unique to them and their situation like it needs, like it could be. um and I see it there. I see it in the way that lawyers set up their law practices, and I'm sure it's the same way in other business accounting firms and things like that, is that we see how other professionals in our area industry have set up their practices, and so we just kind of do what they did. I mean, when I started my law practice, the guy across the hall from me, I kind of helped him as he was setting up his practice. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was waiting for my bar results and for ideally a job, which never, came. But I helped him set up his practice. And so when I decided, what, I'm going to just go out and do my thing, I kind of took what he did, what I'd helped him with, and used it myself, instead of sitting down and thinking like, so is this really the best thing for me? Is this really how I want to set up my practice? It's going to work for me, for my clients, for the life that I want. I mean, that's a big thing that I talk to when I try to help lawyers, is creating this law practice, not because of what others have done, other successful law practices you've seen, emulate that, but what's going to actually work best for you and for what you're looking for.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is a distinction between kind of creating this thing and just kind of copying what somebody else and kind of maybe hoping it'll fit with you, which usually it never does.
Yeah, and I mean, there's obviously from a business perspective, right? There's some things. I mean, I know you do a lot with franchising too, right? And I mean, the whole idea behind franchising and replication, it's like, look, somebody already came up with it. They already figured out how to do it. I mean, McDonald's already knows how to make a Big Mac, right? And they've already perfected all of these different things. So, if you want that, or you want a, Subway franchise or some other thing, right? Because I have a food background. There's kind of a proven method and kind of steps for you to go through, right? And so we see this carry out a lot in our lives. And like I said, in a business setting like that, a lot of times it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're trying to open a brand new sandwich shop as a mom and pop, it's going to be a lot harder than if you buy a Subway franchise. Why? Because you don't have millions of dollars of advertising and everything else, going behind you as a mom and pop.
The research, the history, all that stuff
All
they
that
put
stuff.
into it to develop products.
The
and
menu
stuff.
development, all the supply chain, all the stuff that goes into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, right, there's some people that are like, I would never have a Subway sandwich shop, right? I want to create the, whatever thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be a mom and pop feel. I want to have flexibility in my menu creation, right? Mm-hmm. And so again, for some people, a franchise might be great. For some people, the mom and pop might be great. There's no right or wrong with either one of them. Mm-hmm. But then when we convert this into the spiritual side, which is kind of what this podcast is about.
Sometimes
we
have our moments, I guess.
Yeah. The rules aren't the same for everybody, right? And so on a spiritual path, if you are just copying somebody else, you're not really getting the benefit or following your path, because each of our paths are different. There's different things that each of us have to learn. There's different experiences that each of us have to go through. There's different ways to do spiritual practices, right? And so again, even though Brad and I may do some of the same things, we probably do them in a slightly different way. And that's exactly the way it should be, right? Because I'm different than Brad. And the beautiful thing about it is the artistry that goes on behind it. And the fact that I create differently than Brad does, but they're both beautiful ways to create. And the universe needs both of us creating in the way that each of us create to get the best out of life, right? So again, if we go back to kind of that art example that we had before, right? Andy Warhol, great artist. But imagine if every piece of art in the world was just a copy of Andy Warhol. Monet.
Lots of soup cans.
Lots of soup cans, right? Campbell's. I don't know how he didn't have to pay Campbell's a bunch of money, but anyway, maybe he did. I don't remember. But
free advertising for them.
Free advertising for them. But, Monet, another one, right? Completely different kind of artist than Warhol. I love both of them. But would I want to see every art piece in the world just copy Monet? No, right? And you can throw out whoever else, Liechtenstein, all these other different artists that might be out there, that Pollock, that people might like or not like, but each one of them created art in their own authentic way, in their own system, following their own values and their beliefs. And so for me, that's why, again, my mind kind of went there when you read that. of, especially from a spiritual path and a true growth perspective on a path like this, the only way that you can truly grow is when you get outside of those systems, outside of the indoctrination, outside of the values and beliefs of other people. And you know yourself. You are true to yourself. You are authentic to yourself. That's when the true growth actually happens. Now, along the way, we might be practicing, we might be learning certain practices or rituals or other things like that. But eventually you have to make it your own, right? Because if you don't, then that's where the dogma gets stuck in, right? And so you make it your own. You create your own way of doing it.
Right. No, and that's actually one reason why, for those who, are following us in this podcast, we have not really gone into a lot of things like rituals and different things like that, is because, we want to make sure that you've got this foundational stuff, and that you realize the importance of, kind of tuning into yourself and what really is working for you and what you're aligned with, as opposed to just taking something that Jason and I may do and trying to copy it,
Yep.
because that's, a practice that maybe works for us, that aligns with us. Like every morning I get up and I, write in a gratitude journal that works for me, and something that, is important to me, but that may not work for somebody else. They may have something that different is aligned with them differently. And so, we don't want you to get so stuck into, well, this is what Jason does, so this must be the way it needs to be. This is the right way, because there is no such right way. It's what feels right to you. I mean, and if one of the themes of this entire podcast might be do what feels right.
Yep.
Whatever kind of you feel, that sensation, the sense that this is what I need to be doing, that's what you should do, not what I do, what Jason does, what some guru does, what some hypnotist does that you'll follow and that you can look up to. Do what feels right for you, what's aligned with you.
Yeah. And it's going to change too, right? I mean, that's the thing is as we go through, what's right for you now might not be right for you a year from now. And so, yeah, we're going to share with you some of the things that we do, only from an explanatory perspective. And the reason is some of the things we do might work for you. They might be good for you. You can test them out. You can play with it. You can do things different. But I mean, that's where most of my practices, again, are me kind of learning certain ways of doing things and then me playing with it and creating something that feels more aligned for who I am. Right. And so, I don't sit down for a half an hour or an hour and do the classic meditation on the floor going, right? But am I in a meditative state throughout the day? Yes. Do I do certain things to get myself in an altered state? Yes. Right. But it's not in the traditional way that most people would tell you that you have to get there. And that's because I've played with it. It's like I've opened up the canvas and I'm just starting to paint, right? And I find out what works for me and what doesn't work for me. But until you start doing it, you don't know. You got to have some of the basics down. You got to learn some of the things, but you don't want to just copy what somebody else is doing just to copy it. Now, again, it might work for you, and that's great. But where I really get concerned is when I see so many people copying so much of their whole life is just a copy of someone else. You don't grow when you're doing that.
Right. Yep. At that point, you are merely a clone of that other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not as fun either. I like to play more.
Well, no,
we talked
the idea of dissonance. If they may be doing things that doesn't align with you. You're not that person, and so it's, you're not going to feel the same way. You get the same benefit that they get out of it if you just by copying. And I love the idea of playing with stuff, like you said. You maybe, you learn something from somebody, and you get inspiration, and then use it as a starting point, but then you take it off on your own way. You say, hey, I want to throw paint on a canvas because I've seen, famous painters do that, Jackson Pollock or whoever. You're just throwing paint on there, but then you realize, that's okay, but I kind of like, it works better for me if I maybe throw paint on a certain way, or I do this kind of a technique. And same thing with spirituality. Throw the paint on there, but use it as a learning experience, as a starting point, and then kind of take it and build on it from there, what works for best for you.
Well, and I think it's probably good too to make sure that we mention along with this is just to kind of reconfirm to everybody who's listening, because we've already told you a few times, there's no right way, there's no wrong way, right? But there also should be no judgment for how other people choose to show their art, right? And again, I mean, there's always going to be critics, and there are art critics, right? But you can see so much of the time, especially in the arts themselves, musicians, painters, sculptors, other artists like that. There is actors, there's performance art. What's the other term for anyway? Doesn't matter. But there is true artists respect and honor other artists. Okay. So what that means is if Monet was walking by an Andy Warhol, he'd probably stop and go, well, that's interesting. I've never seen anybody do something quite like that before. I'm curious why he does it that way, right? And he would be respectful of the way that Warhol expresses his art, just as, again, hopefully, Warhol would be of Monet. So in this space that we're in, too, right? There should be no judgment. There should be no comparison either, because we are all different kinds of artists. We are all at different points in our life. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some of my friends that I look at them sometimes in awe, like, holy shit, I wish I could kind of do that. Right? Mm-hmm. But at the same point, they might be an oak tree. I might be a palm tree. It's not going to do me any good to sit there as a palm tree going, oh, I wish I were an oak tree. But I might sit there and look at it and go, oh, it's interesting what that oak tree does. I wonder if there's any of those things that I could emulate or make my own, right? Because we can always learn from other people, right? And I'm learning from people all the time. I mean, some of these friends that I have that I guess if you looked at us would be further along the spiritual path, if you will, based on some of the gifts or things that they have or things that they can do. But we're still the same, right? We're still the same because I do things in a different way than they do. And so again, they're looking at me like, holy shit, Jason, how do you do that? I wish I could do that, right? And so there's that respect and the sharing, both ways. Like, oh, well, when I do it this way. I don't know. It just seems to work for me, right? Oh, that's interesting. Maybe I want to try that a little bit, right? Because that's where, things end up really happening, right? And so again, I'll just take a musical one because this just popped into my head again. Everybody knows about the Beatles, right? Everybody in the world knows about the Beatles. Greatest selling group of all time, 700 and some million records or whatever. A lot of people know about the Beach Boys, right? Especially if you're here in America, but the Beach Boys don't get as much credit as they probably should. And I'm going to tell you the story as to why. Okay. Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys heard the Rubber Soul album from the Beatles, and it inspired him. And he did the Pet Sounds album based on the inspiration that he had from listening to Rubber Soul. And he thought Rubber Soul was the greatest album that he had heard at that point. He created Pet Sounds, Beach Boys album. The Beatles listened to Pet Sounds, and the Beatles said, wow, that is the greatest album that I think we have ever listened to. The things that were being done on that. That inspired them to create Sgt. Pepper. Again, for the mass media, mass people, most people know about Sgt. Pepper. They don't know about Rubber Soul. They don't know about Pet Sounds, but everybody knows about Sgt. Pepper. It's got a very famous cover, but do you understand? Sgt. Pepper never would have happened if those two groups of artists weren't celebrating and curious and practicing and playing with the inspiration that they got from each other. Right? The Beatles had a different sound than the Beach Boys. And the Beach Boys had a different sound than the Beatles. But they both inspired each other in their own way of artistry to help make both of them better. Can you imagine a world without a Sgt. Pepper album? Some pretty great songs on that. Pretty great songs on the other two as well, right? But it's the same thing again for us as we're going through this whole process, right? Can you celebrate and be curious and supportive of other people's art, especially when it comes from a spiritual standpoint? Or are you going to be the kind of person who is judging and criticizes and tells people that that's the wrong way to do it? Because I will tell you, Brian Wilson, when he did Pet Sounds, there were some of the things that the professional musicians in the recording studio were like, Brian, you're not allowed to do that in music, right? We were taught in school that you can't do that. Well, you can, because he did it, right? And again, it's, can we learn from others? Can we celebrate the artistry in other people? Can we play with it? Can we make it our own so that we're actually creating and not copying, right? In order to grow and develop, you got to create, not copy. So I had to throw a little music in there too. Sgt. Pepper's lonely, Sgt. Pepper's lonely. Anyway.
We can't say any more than that though, because we don't need any takedown notices.
No. Yeah, you can't do any more than that.
But, I'm a few bars. No, again, and I just think it's just kind of fascinating how one quote that we can kind of take it two different ways and see two completely different lessons in there, that I think are both important and relevant for those people who are on the spiritual path to pick up. And I don't think it was necessarily meant for a spiritual that wasn't somebody thinking in the spiritual way. They were just thinking, I think 3D level, like, hey, you gotta kind of do things on your own, like, but there's no wrong answers. It's all what you can take out of it, what you can aspire to it, and what works for you.
Yep.
And what kind of aligns with you, what feels right. And I think one of the reasons why, at least I know one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast is because of that interplay, to be able to learn from others, to be able to take inspiration from their paths. And not that my path is going to look like anyone else's, and not that theirs are going to look like mine, but just to be able to say, hey, this worked for you. Maybe I can kind of take something from that and use it and make it my own. And that maybe is something that I need to help me take this next step along the path. So,
no, like you said, I think it's great. Maybe we'll have to do this on some of the other episodes too. It'd be interesting to sometimes find quotes or sayings like that. In one episode, we kind of hit it from one angle, and the other episode, we hit it from a different angle. Who knows? Keep listening. That might be coming up.
or it might not. I mean, we just
we don't know.
our rear ends.
Yeah, well,
yeah, kind of 5 minutes before we record, so we may decide that was stupid. We're never going to do it again.
well,
And next time we'll talk about I don't know, candle wets and stuff, and who knows? I don't know.
But on a serious note, right? Because each time that we record these, we try to do what we feel inspired and is supposed to come through us today. Right. So again, that's another learning, for everybody listening too, is we don't come into these things scripted. Yeah, we have some topics. Yeah, sometimes something will come up. But like today, literally Brad saw this thing today and was like, oh. And we talked about it, and it's like, yep, that feels like the thing we should talk about today. And so then that's what we talk about. Right. And so, again, there's no right way, there's no wrong way of doing this, but I kind of had fun doing this, where it was kind of the 2 episodes from the 2 different sides. So who knows? We might not, because each time that we record, we kind of feel what the inspiration is that's supposed to come out for the day.
Exactly.
All right. So with that, just as we wrap up here, just ask yourself, as you're going through, do you feel like you're just copying somebody, or are you actually creating? Right. And if you maybe feel like you're copying more than creating, what can you do? What one thing can maybe you do different now to kind of move forward and start creating instead of just copying? Because it makes life a lot more fun as well. As you create your own systems, you're aligned and living your values and your beliefs, instead of staying stuck in that box or indoctrination of either what you were raised in or in what you're trying to emulate with other people that you might respect or admire. And we're going to have some awkward silence because Brad is writing notes. And I wanted to do this at the end just to make sure.
Inspiration, like you said, pops up, and when you got to jump on it. So
yep, you do. So everybody, thanks for listening. Again, leave us a review. Even if you want to put a 1-star, that's okay. We'd prefer 5-star though. But more importantly, if you got value out of this, share this with other people. I mean, Brad and I aren't doing this to make money. We're showing up and sharing so that people like you can get value out of it. And if you got value out of it, then somebody else probably is too. So if you know other people who are walking a spiritual path or trying to, share with them, help them, right? Because sharing is caring as well. And thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode, everybody.
See you next time.